Boredom is the key to unlocking your greatness. And before you click off, I also did not believe this either. And I think in today's society nowadays, with so much social media and options for ways to hold your attention and many choices to choose from if you want to distract yourself, it can be harder more than ever today to really take the time to step back and be in silence. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people that I know in person, I've even heard them say online, where don't have silence in my life ever. Like, I cannot sit in silence one bit. I will play music here. I have to be on social media. I have to constantly consume. I can't just be still. It's scary for a lot of people. The idea of being alone with our minds is terrifying for many, many people. And I completely understand, because when you're not taught the proper ways to understand your mind, when you're not taught the proper ways to accept and experience what you may have been through, both good and bad, if you don't have proper processing systems for how to communicate, and if you're not living a life that really is fulfilling for you, why would you want to face the music, so to speak? But one thing I've found as I've transitioned into what I believe for me is a new era of thinking, which I talked about a bit in my last video, which is you have to become a gardener in a war, which talks about, there is a time for the first part, which is being the warrior in the garden, of being actionable and building resilience and being very, like I said, action oriented towards your goals. But I do believe that there comes a time where you have to transition into more of a maintenance mindset, where it's not so much about having to constantly keep your mind active to think new things, but almost conserve your energy to maintain the things that matter to you now that you've discovered them. And so I believe that boredom is really the doorway into that, because the way that the subconscious mind works is that whenever you are engaging with something, with your eyes, with your ears, even your nose, like anything that is taking in sensory input, you are locked into consuming mode, right? Meaning that you're taking in data, and it's more of a recording button for your subconscious mind. But what's important for it is a moment to breathe. It's almost similar to the principles of working out. When you build the muscle in the gym, it's not when you're lifting the weight. It's when after the gym, you're sitting down, you're sleeping, is when your body repairs the ripped up and sort of tiny micrements of teared tissue until it builds a new muscle. So growing does not happen in action. It happens in rest. And so I think we're not really taught that, because one of the pros, I guess, of capitalism is that they've made it so that the average person can be taught to enact and do things to a point where they don't really have to think about what they're doing. But the very negative part of that is that it tends to put a lot of us in a state of being shut down, where we're working on autopilot, where our subconscious mind is leading the race without us being aware of what's happening. And so while your subconscious mind is essentially a quantum supercomputer capable of doing many things, it can do your job for you on autopilot while still taking in information and still doing its processing systems on a biological, physiological level, right? Chemical level. We're not using it to the fullest capacity when we're not consciously in the driver's seat of our mind and actively giving the primal animal of it time to rest. I really do think that a lot of things can mimic nurturing and raising something. Like the same way that you would take care of an animal or even a child, I think it's the same way that you should take care of yourself. And so when we constantly are in the state of go, go, go with no rest, this is where we face and we're more susceptible to burnout, where we're more susceptible to cognitive dissonance, and really not using the full capacity of our body. We start to muddle things, our memory gets laggy, we're not as sharp as we can be because we don't give time for the machine of our mind and body to really get adequate rest. We eat to stay up, we consume social media to fall asleep. Everything seems to be a placebo to avoid the vastness of our minds. But in the way that the mind is a jungle to tame, it's your jungle to tame. I guess really when you talk to people about the importance of building and working on yourself, doing self-improvement, it does sometimes feel like the equivalent, even from when I first got into it, for myself, to convince myself, it was almost like trying to try to get a baby to eat vegetables. You know what I'm saying? When it's like, nah, I don't really, but it's good for them, it's going to build their bones. And so facing boredom, I feel like, is mental vegetables for your mind. It allows you to really sit and sift through your mind. It allows your minds to create connections within yourself. It allows it to really do the work that it needs to do after consuming so many things. Because if you think about how many things you're consuming, you probably have inside you way more of a rich bank of idea making than you might believe, because you're constantly cross-examining it with social media, and maybe you're reading books or consuming music or going out and talking to people. You have so many like raw ideas that can be entangled together and mixed together, that by not allowing your mind to sift through these things, you're almost wasting the raw creativity you have within yourself that can be refined if you just let your mind do the work. When we become in a state of constant consumption, when we become in a state where we're not really trying to face the music, we also avoid these subtle things that might be underneath us as a reason for why we need to constantly consume to avoid it. There might be emotional things you might have to face. There might be work that you're procrastinating on. And so by sitting in silence, it really allows you to be honest with yourself. And that can be hard. You know, most times on earth, we don't want to face the truth because it's difficult, because it's not fun, it's not sexy. It's sometimes it is really more work than sometimes it can feel like pleasure. But it becomes in that mindset that you're always going to face something difficult. And it's whether you face it eyes wide open and prepared for the impact, or when it catches you off guard or builds over time to where you're in a constant state of unfamiliarity and distrust with yourself because you haven't built that connection and rapport with your mind. You know, your mind is always going to be there. Your body is always going to be there in this lifetime. And so I think by facing boredom, you realize how much it actually is fun. And I think it's an underrated thing where I think the first 20% of doing anything, especially if you're procrastinating, feels agonizing. But once you lock in, your body kind of just admits defeat to like trying to convince you to do something else, and you face the work ahead, it honestly feels relaxing because you're finally doing something that you know is overdone, just like cleaning your room. When it builds up and builds up and builds up, you're like, oh my God, I have to get this done, or I have to do my chores. It's like dishes in the sink. But once you finally get into the mood, you put on a little music, you kind of get into the flow, you feel both happiness for doing this work, but also relief for finally getting it done. And it takes a lot less time than you think. And it doesn't have to be a 3-day fast of no technology, no consumption. It could be just 20 minutes a day. And you can meditate. But I think even just sitting down and just looking at the ceiling, or looking out, or sitting outside and looking at a tree, and just let your mind sift through whatever it wants to sift through. You know, it's a little bit different from meditation, where it isn't actively just trying to focus on the breath, though that is very useful as well. Highly recommend. It's like cleaning out your mind, like taking a shower for your mind, honestly. But when you just sit there and allow yourself to kind of just take in connection, to just let it do its thing, you don't realize how much you've been missing internally by not sitting still. So for me, it's definitely allowed me to make adjustments and connections with myself in a way that I couldn't have done before if I wasn't willing to slow down the pace and open up my mind. So I do believe it comes from being able to process information, being able to make creative connections that you may have not been able to do before, exploring the remnants of your mind and all the stuff that's inside you that you may have not seen before, and also to get new perspectives. Sometimes the best thing you can do, especially in times of turmoil, or if you're going through like a difficult situation, is to give your mind space to breathe. Because how you might act today, I think that's also why a lot of people say you should sleep on things, because it allows your mind to be in a state of silence where you can process the information, digest the emotions, and really have a clearer, more grounded picture of whatever you're going through. So I think by incorporating little moments of boredom in your day, you really get to fulfill the highest level of creativity and connection and just understanding of yourself than you ever could before by just constantly consuming. So yeah, this is the video. Peace.